All right, well, starting off with chapter 19 of the book of Genesis. So this is a more fun stuff. We get to learn more about Lot. The famous stories about Sodom and Gomorrah will be discussed here today as well. So as we're moving on, starting to get a little bit past the stories of Abraham himself and into more of other things that are going on around the life of Abraham also. So chapter 19, Lot entertains holy men. The men of Sodom seek to abuse Lot's guests and are smitten with blindness. Lot is sent out of Sodom. The Lord rains brimstone and fire upon Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot's daughters preserve his seed in the land. So some interesting stuff we get to talk about today. All right, verse 1, and there came two angels to Sodom at even. Now in here, we actually see in the footnote A for verse 1 is actually Joseph Smith translation changes it from two angels to three angels. If you remember in the last chapter, there were three angels or wise men that had come to talk with Abraham, and then the Lord appeared to Abraham as well. The three wise men that he was dealing with left and had headed towards Sodom. And so now these are very possibly the same three wise men that had just talked with Abraham are now coming to Lot. If you remember from some of our past discussions as well, Lot liked this idea of hospitality. Abraham was a very hospitable person, which is why Sodom and Gomorrah's people hated him, because he was hospitable. Sodom and Gomorrah was designed around trapping people and basically enriching themselves at the expense of their guests. So Lot decided to be hospitable. He would actually build probably kind of like a hotel or a hostel type idea where guests could come stay with him. But because of their laws and rules and things, they would usually, once they found out that somebody was staying with Lot, that the people would come take them and do their way with them, basically. So actually for this verse, the Bible dictionary, hospitality is uses this verse as a reference. So he says, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom, and Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. Verse 2, and he said, behold now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night, and wash your feet, and ye shall rise up early, and go on your ways. And they said, nay, but we will abide in the street all night. Verse 3, and he pressed upon them greatly, and they turned in unto him, and entered into his house, and he made them a feast, and did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat. Now, verse 3, you can go back and reference Genesis 18, like it says, to talk about these three wise men, that they came and hung out with Abraham for a little while as well. Verse 4 here, but before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. And they called unto Lot and said unto him, where are the men which came into thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them. Now there is a footnote in here under that word know, that says know is used in both Hebrew and English in this kind of context as a euphemism in place of a sexual word. So they want to have their way with these guys, basically. So you look at it, men asking for their opportunities to have their way with other men. Kind of gives you some ideas there. All right, so promiscuity was rampant in Sodom and Gomorrah, basically. It was a pretty open society that way. Verse 6, and Lot went out at the door unto them and shut the door after him. So he goes outside, shuts the door behind him, so I can't get in. And he says, and said, I pray you, brethren, do not so wickedly. Verse 8, he says, behold, now I have two daughters which have not known man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do ye to them as is good in your eyes. Only unto these men do nothing, for therefore they came they under the shadow of my roof. So he's, according to this, he's offering his daughters for sexual acts rather than these men. Now we do have some Joseph Smith translation in this section here in the appendix. And Joseph Smith translation actually comes out and says, and they said unto him, stand back. and they were angry with him. So this is after verse 8, basically. And they said among themselves, this one man came in to sojourn among us, and he will needs now make himself to be a judge. Now we will deal worse with him than with them. Wherefore they said unto the man, we will have the man and thy daughters also, and we will do with them as seemeth us good. Now this was after the wickedness of Sodom. So this is, now they're saying, basically, guess what? Too late, man. We're going to take the men and your daughters. We're just going to take all of them and have our way with them, basically. You're going to be hosed. We're done with you because you're trying to change. You don't want to give us what we want, basically. So, and remember, we talked about in the book of Abraham, when we dealt with the stories of the lion couch and the Procrustean bed, that they had this is what they would do. They'd bring the guests in, they would basically throw a party, have their way with them, and then pretty much let them die, take all their stuff from them. So it wasn't, if you weren't part of the group in Sodom, if you didn't contribute to the group of Sodom yourself, then you were toast, basically. They didn't take kindly to strangers. So verse 13, and Lot said, behold, now I have 2 daughters which have not known man. Let me, I pray you, plead with my brethren that I may not bring them out unto you, and ye shall not do unto them as seemeth good in your eyes. So it almost sounds like Lot's kind of going, okay, then let me talk, because, he's trying to now save his daughters, it sounds like. Verse 14, for God will not justify his servant in this thing. Wherefore let me plead with my brethren this once only, that unto these men ye do nothing, that they may have peace in my house. For therefore came they under the shadow of my roof. Verse 15, and they were angry with Lot, and came near to break the door. But the angels of God, which were holy men, put forth their hand, and pulled Lot into the house unto them, and shut the door. So this is this is kind of telling a little bit more also in here. A little bit of interesting, more information, basically, not quite adding to the story as much, but just helping us understand more that they're going, this isn't right. You shouldn't be doing this, basically. So let's go back to verse 9 to kind of get a contrast with this. And they said, stand back. And they said again, this one fellow came in to sojourn, and he will needs be a judge. Now will we deal worse with thee than with them. And they pressed sore upon the man, even Lot, and came near to break the door. But the men put forth their hand and pulled Lot into the house to them and shut the door. So we get a little bit more of the conversation in the Joseph Smith translation. If you look at how these verses break down, basically, and he's trying to say, look, Lot's trying his best to make sure that these men that he recognizes are very spiritual, very devout people, are not harmed by the people in Sodom. At one point, he even offers his daughters, and so the people in Sodom say, too late, we've decided you're not going to make the decision for us. You're not going to be a judge on us on what we get. We're going to take your daughters and the men. We're just going to take it all out, basically. And so now he's trying to renegotiate his position here, and it wasn't working. They were angry with him. So then the guests, the angels, basically pull Lot back into the house and shut the door behind him. So now they're basically trapped inside the home with all these angry people of Sodom outside wanting in. And they're pretty upset. So now we get to verse 11, and they smote the men that were at the door of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves to find the door. So now they can't find the door. They can't find they were trying to press the door, trying to attack, and they got smote with blindness. So now they can't find the door. They're crawling around. They're trying to feel for the door to figure out where it is, what's going on, which buys Lot and his guests some time. So verse 12 here, by the way, Bible Dictionary, blindness is actually, that's referenced there. Verse 12, and the men said unto Lot, now Joseph Smith adds holy men onto that, hast thou here any besides? Son-in-law and thy sons and thy daughters and whatsoever thou hast in the city, bring them out of this place. So he's saying basically, look, you got to go. It's time to get out of Sodom. You've got to get out of here. Verse 13, for we will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxen great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord hath sent us to destroy it. So they're revealing to Lot the purpose of why they were there. And they're basically there to warn him, you and your family have got to go. You've got to get out of here because we're here to destroy this place. This place is horrible. God has finally given them time to repent, and they're done. Their window of opportunity is done. It's time to destroy them. They're so bad. So that's where we're at here. Verse 14, and Lot went out and spake unto his sons-in-law. So he had some daughters that were married as well, which married his daughters and said, Up, get you out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. But he seemed as one that mocked unto his sons-in-law. So they, from what it sounds like, if you look at this, basically they said, it sounds like his sons-in-law didn't heed his counsel. They mocked him and said, this is baloney. You're not right. This is crazy. There's no way these cities can be destroyed. So they mocked him, basically. And so he left them and he went. And so he had his wife and his two daughters living with him. Verse 15, and when the morning arose, then the angels hastened Lot, saying, Arise, take thy wife and thy two daughters, which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city. So it sounds like from how the story is reading, there's a good chance that Lot had more than just those two daughters. He had other daughters that were older, and they were married to guys who were probably from Sodom, and the guys wouldn't believe him. They wouldn't believe Lot. So he just took the two daughters he still had at home and his wife, and they got out of there, basically. Verse 15, and when the morning rose, then the angels, I just read that one. Sorry. Verse 16, while he lingered, the men laid hold upon his hand and upon the hand of his wife and upon the hand of his two daughters, the Lord being merciful unto him, and they brought him forth and set him without the city. So these holy men grabbed him and they moved him outside the city, basically. And it came to pass when they had brought them forth abroad, he said, Escape for thy life. Look not behind thee, neither stay thou in all the plain. Escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed. So interesting, he's telling them, if you don't get out of this area, and we're not talking about just outside the city, you need to get out of this entire area. Go up into the mountains, get away from everything, lest you'll be consumed. So this is a pretty big destruction that's going to happen. Verse 18, the Lot said unto them, Oh, not so, my Lord. Behold, now thy servant hath found grace in thy sight, and thou hast magnified thy mercy, which thou hast showed unto me in saving my life. And I cannot escape to the mountain, lest some evil take me and I die. Now behold, this city is near to flee unto, and it is a little one. Oh, let me escape hither. Is it not a little one? And my soul shall live. So he's saying, I can't make it to the mountains. Let me go over to this other town nearby, and I will stay there, basically. And that's what he's saying here. And he said unto him, See, I have accepted thee concerning this thing also, and I will not overthrow this city for the which thou hast spoken. Haste thee, escape thither, for I cannot do anything till thou come thither. Therefore the name of the city was called Zor. Now, if you remember, this was one of the cities that was part of those big battles when Sodom and Gomorrah and those other ones came together to fight. So he's fleeing to this city of Zor, and the Lord says, okay, we'll let you go there. Verse 23, the sun was risen upon the earth when Lot entered into Zor. So they had They had fled the area. They're in this other city now, basically, and the sun is coming up finally. So it's morning, dawn is breaking, and now this is what's happening. In 24, then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and that which grew upon the ground. So the place was destroyed, and it was destroyed with brimstone and fire, rained upon, which means it's coming from above down on them. So lots and lots of things to wonder about what happened, what really happened here. Because we don't really have a good example of where Sodom and Gomorrah actually is. In today's world, we actually have an idea. but it's because of more modern archaeological research that we have a good idea of where Sodom and Gomorrah used to be. Because remember, Sodom and Gomorrah used to be a very fertile place. Like tons of stuff would grow, easy to take care of your crops and your animals and things, gorgeous area. And there's nothing like that anywhere near the Palestine area, basically. It's all deserty, all harsh lands. So scientists have tried for years to understand where is Sodom and Gomorrah, what's going on with this. So let's look at some interesting information here. In fact, in verse 24, when he talks about brimstone and fire, in 24c, the Hebrew is combustible materials, especially sulfur and pitch. So pitch is a tar, basically. So sulfur and tar would also probably denote volcanic activity. So we could have some volcanic activity in here as well. Maybe volcanic erupted to spew stuff down on them. Could be part of that raining down type things, not too dissimilar from what we understand from Pompeii, is a very good possibility. So here is actually some interesting quotes that I have found to help us understand this. I believe this one comes from Hugh Nibley. It says, the area is prone to earthquakes and has a lot of oil and sulfur underground under the salt mountains. An earthquake could allow the sulfur, also called brimstone, when lit, and tar to come up and cause a fire that consume the cities. Sulfur, when it burns, will melt and turn into a bubbly red hot mess that can burn for a long time and out off toxic fumes. The area sits in the Jordan River rift faults. The earth is opening up and tearing itself, which is why it is so low in elevation. Tel El Ham could be the place of Sodom. It is in the north of Dead Sea and sits on two major trade routes. It has fertile land and a river near it. The city is huge and is on a hill, and it experienced a sudden destruction that turned the whole city into rubble. The pottery melted into glass. It was so hot. Some scientists think it could have been a meteor that caused hot temps that flash burn the area. The pottery shows heat 4 times greater than the sun. If it was a sky burst, it would have also created a tsunami in the Dead Sea. The salt content in that water would ruin the ground and make it hard to grow anything for a long time. They also think a fragment could have made an impact crater in the southwest part of the city that would have leveled the city. So they're talking about, this is some ideas that were coming around when Hugh Nibley was around. They have some follow-up research on this that actually comes from the Israel Times, so a news articles from the nation of Israel. And they talk about this. So in this area, there's actually a hill, and they've discovered there used to be a big city up on this hill. And when they look at it, they realize that it was destroyed by some major destruction. Because they don't necessarily find the people fleeing. Usually there's signs and symptoms of things happening. Like in Pompeii, there was time for the people to flee. They didn't find people like dead in their fields as much as they found people huddling inside buildings, huddling down at the coastline a lot, where they couldn't escape. They couldn't get enough ships to get out of there, and then they died. So they were in the state of fleeing. They were lying prone on the ground. They'd fallen to the ground on the streets. They were huddled together with their loved ones inside their home because they had time to think before the destruction hit them. They didn't have a lot of time, but they had time to think and to do something. And so we see in Pompeii, the people are fleeing in a state of fleeing that when they were basically preserved by the pyroclastic clouds. In this city, Tel El Ham, they don't necessarily see the people in a state of panic and fleeing. They just find a lot of people dead. And because of the pottery is a mixture of clay and soils and things that come together to make these pots, and they get fired in a kiln at high temperatures to form that solid piece of material to build stuff out of, to build cups, to have plates, to have carrying containers, things like that. So pottery can have some opportunities to hold some secrets for us. And they say that it's almost like some of that pottery was re-fired. And because of how it responds to heat, they can tell the amount of heat that it experienced was 4 times greater than the sun. So some serious stuff was happening. So let me read this article here to understand this a little bit better. A multidisciplinary team of scientists has a new theory for why all human civilization abruptly ended on the banks of the Dead Sea some 3,700 years ago. According to analyzed archaeological evidence, the disaster of biblical proportions can be explained by a massive explosion similar to one recorded over 100 years ago in Russia. This is a good one. This is a fun one to study. In 1908, a massive blast near Siberia's stony Tunguska River flattened some 2,000 square kilometers of uninhabited taiga forestry. Curiously, no crater was discovered, and scientists explained the strange phenomena through a meteor explosion some 5 to 10 kilometers above the land. Now, an interdisciplinary team of archaeologists and scientists are using the Tunguska explosion as a model to explain the equally curious end to a thriving civilization that lived for thousands of years in a plain near the Dead Sea. So to give you a little bit of background on this, the Tunguska Blast, which is a fascinating thing to study, there was a meteor that came in and just leveled a forest. It was just miles of trees down. Scientists didn't even realize what happened. Some of the indigenous tribes in that part of Siberia had heard an explosion, and a couple people had died in it who were out gathering stuff in those woods. But there's just more stories of what they had heard or saw, kind of a deal. But not a lot of direct evidence because, it destroyed the area. So scientists suddenly stumble into this place. They're out exploring and realize what happened to this forest. It's gone down. They think it was like a meteor hit, but there's no crater. There's a lake, kind of a bog, marshy area, but there's no crater. And the lake's not like this super deep lake. I think they've actually found some fragments possibly in the bottom of it, but it's so muddy and hard that it's not easy to find stuff down there. They try to look for like a big crater or big meteor and they couldn't find it, but they find little fragments here and there. What they believe happened is this asteroid came into the atmosphere, and as it was burning up, it exploded above the surface. And that explosion is like a bunch of nuclear bombs tied together and all going off at once. That's what leveled the city. There was a gentleman who actually built a scale model of the Tunguska Valley, and he made these little flags for the trees and then actually put an equivalent together, what kind of bomb would go off at this scale to equal what happened in Tunguska. And he blew this little bomb, basically this little homemade bomb suspended just above where they believe where the meteor would have gone off above the earth. And when he did his experiment, all the trees laid down in almost the same pattern as they found from all the trees laid down in the Tunguska area. So fascinating story. If you want to see something, it's really cool. It's 1908. So just over little over 100 years ago, that blast happened. It's a good story to learn what is possible. What are some things that can happen? So they're using that idea to understand what could have happened in this time of Sodom and Gomorrah, basically. As reported in Science News at the recently concluded Denver-based ASOR annual meeting, Director of Scientific Analysis at Jordan's Tel El Hammam excavation project, Philip Sylvia, presented a paper, The Middle Gore Event, Catastrophic Termination of a Bronze Age Civilization, during a session on environmental archaeology of the Near East. So that's his paper, The Gore Event, Catastrophic Termination of a Bronze Age Civilization. You could probably type that in and click and type in the word PDF for Google search and probably find his paper. According to the paper's abstract, the scientists discovered evidence of a high heat explosive event north of the Dead Sea that instantaneously devastated approximately 500 kilometers. The explosion would have wiped out all civilization in the affected area, including Middle Bronze Age cities and towns. Sylvia told Science News that the blast would have instantly killed estimated 40,000 to 65,000 people who inhabited Middle Gore, a 25-kilometer wide circular plain in Jordan. Likewise, the fertile soil would have been stripped of nutrients by the high heat, and waves of the Dead Sea's briny and hydride salts would have, tsunami-like, washed over the surrounding area. At the same time, the explosion's fallout caused blisteringly hot, strong winds, which deposited a rain of mineral grains which have been found on pottery at Tel El Hammam. So if this is true, they're saying that similar to what happened in the story of Tunguska, this huge fireball comes out of the sky, a big meteor. And when we say a big meteor, it doesn't take that big of a meteor to cause problems. If you've ever looked at Meteor Crater in Arizona, there's a big hole in the earth, kind of you can see it from space. That from what I understand, Meteor Crater, it's 2 miles wide. It's a big crater, 2 miles wide and a mile deep. It's huge. It's a giant hole. And it was made by a meteor the size of a VW bug. So if you look at the size of a VW bug car, that's what made it. In fact, it was traveling, they believe, so fast that it entered the atmosphere somewhere over Paris and then hit Arizona about 20 minutes later. That is moving. And then it hit and it created a Category 4 wind in every direction. So hurricane Category 4 type winds in every single direction that traveled for miles. And then it made this hole 2 miles wide and a mile deep. It doesn't look like much, admittedly. When you drive up to it, you got to go down to the, as you're heading like towards the south rim of the Grand Canyon, and then you go east instead of west. Basically, there's like an interstate junction right there, and you, instead of going west to go to the south rim of the Grand Canyon, you go east over to Meteor Crater. It's a few miles over. It honestly doesn't look like much. It looks like a little mountain. You pull up to this visitor center, you don't think much about it, and then you get out to the crater and realize this is one ginormous hole in the ground. Holy cow. But it was a VW bug-sized meteor that caused that. So when we talk about giant, major asteroids or comets or things, meteors coming in to cause destruction, it doesn't have to be big. I mean, a bus-sized one, which doesn't sound huge, would be, because of the speed it's traveling, the intensity of the heat and everything, would be amazingly devastating. It does not take much. Okay, so just understand that. So this says here, 5 large sites in the region which have also been excavated offered additional evidence of an immediate end to settlement at the same time of the proposed Tel El Hammam disaster. According to Science News, radiocarbon dating of organic archaeological evidence has shown that structures, mud brick walls, suddenly disappeared around 3,700 years ago, leaving only stone foundations. Contemporary potsherds, glazes apparently experienced temperatures high enough to transform them to glass, perhaps as hot as the surface of the sun, Sylvia told the news source. So now this is unraveling that mystery. So they believe an asteroid came down and exploded above the surface just outside this area on its way in, and then that broke into smaller fragments that impacted the area and just decimated everything, all of life in the area basically. And then because it hit, the direction it hit, the impact of the blast would have pushed a whole bunch of water like a tsunami from the Dead Sea, which is the saltiest body of water in the ocean. The second saltiest is the Great Salt Lake in Utah. The saltiest body of water in the ocean, it pushed in the world, basically, it pushed that water all over the place. And the salt, the high concentration of salt, would have literally and basically effectively sterilized the ground so it couldn't grow. So it made life hard, and it just vaporized, and it hit so fast, like I says, even the glaze on the pottery, it turned it to glass. Okay, if you take sand and you heat it up super hot and spin it, you get the silica fibers, which they make glass out of. But this happened instantaneously, not over a process. That's what's crazy. All right, so let's go back into this to unravel this a little bit more. The study was born of a historical riddle. That the most productive agricultural land in the region, which had supported flourishing civilizations continuously for at least 3,000 years, should suddenly relinquish, then resist, human habitation for such a long period of time has begged investigation, states the excavation's website. So this is what they're looking at, realizing that this area of the world used to be one of the more fertile areas of land ever. Like, it's just amazing. You could live there, you could grow crops, you could grow your animals. It was an awesome area. It has sustained multiple cities, thousands and tens of thousands of people life for 3,000 years, and then it suddenly is wiped out, and then basically doesn't allow any civilization to live on it since then. Nobody's been able to use that land the same. It's just desert, it's rock, it's sand, and there's not much out there these days. So it's pretty crazy. Now let's see, the team of scientists from New Mexico Tech, Northern Arizona University, North Carolina State University in Elizabeth City, State University as well, North Carolina, DePaul University, Trinity Southwest University, the Comet Research Group, and Los Alamos National Laboratories analyzed samples from 12 seasons of Tel El Hammam excavations to conclude that the most logical explanation for the settlement's demise was a meteor explosion. This paper surveys the multiple lines of evidence that collectively suggest a Tunguska-like cosmic airburst event that obliterated civilization, including the Middle Bronze Age city-state anchored by Tel El Hammam in the Middle Gore, the 25-kilometer diameter circular plain immediately north of the Dead Sea. Let's see, at 1700 BC, basically, or 3,700 years before the present time, write the authors. Based upon the archaeological evidence, it took at least 600 years to recover sufficiently from the soil destruction and contamination before civilization could again become established in the eastern Middle Gore. So 600 years before they could even think of using this area again for anything. There's a biblical explanation. Could this massive disaster offer an explanation for the biblical story of Sodom? According to a 2013 Biblical Archaeology Review article by TEHEP co-director Dr. Stephen Collins, the Tel El Hammam site is a strong candidate for the biblical city of Sodom due to a multitude of factors. The discovered disaster and its precise location, which he ties to biblical references of Kikar, or idiomatically, the plain. Okay, remember they talk about that. Don't stay here or the plain. You've got to keep moving. In the article, among other biblical citations, Collins quotes from Genesis 19, 24 through 25. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, including all those living in the cities and also the vegetation in the land. On the ground at the site, Collins witnessed such destruction firsthand. In a vivid description, he writes, the violent conflagration that ended occupation at Tel El Hammam produced melted pottery, scorched foundation stones, and several feet of ash and destruction debris churned into a dark gray matrix as if in a Cuisinart. Could it really be that this destruction, hypothetically caused by the proposed meteor explosion and its catastrophic fallout, are the natural causes of the divine wholesale razing of the city recorded in the Bible? In a jointly authored paper between Sylvia and Collins, this is the name of their paper, The Civilization Ending, 3.7 thousand year event, archaeological data, sample analyses, and biblical implications, the authors write, quote, the physical evidence from Tel El Hammam and neighboring sites exhibit signs of a highly destructive, concussive, and thermal event that one might expect from what is described in Genesis 19. Further, based on studies by atomic energy researcher Samuel Gladstone, the authors write that an airburst yield of 10 megatons over the northeast corner of the Dead Sea would be sufficient to produce the physical damage observed 10 kilometers away at Tel El Hammam. Note that this is only one half the yield of the Tunguska airburst event in Siberia, well within recent human experience for meteoric airbursts, they write. So this was the destruction at Tel El Hammam, they believe was, what they say, I think it was, they said it was half the strength. It was the Tunguska Blast, which we have all kinds of evidence of, was twice as strong as this possible one. So is it possible? It is absolutely 100% possible that what happened was this meteor comes down, it blows itself up at a certain height above the earth. The blast from that, which they said was around 10 megatons. So if you look up your, let me look that up just to make sure I get that right. A airburst yield of 10 megatons. Okay, that is a very big explosion. Okay, so look up, if you want to understand atomic energy, look that up. What is 10 megatons equivalent to? It is a big blast, and that was half of Tunguska. Tunguska was more like 20 megatons, basically. And it's 100% possible and very plausible. And even the description given in Genesis points to this idea that not only did it hit the city, but it blew the entire area out and destroyed all the vegetation as well. So it really, the description gives us an idea of this is very possible. So here's what they said. The destruction not only of Tel El Hammam, or Sodom, but also its neighbors, Gomorrah and the other cities of the plain, was most likely caused by meteoric airburst event, the authors conclude. In his Biblical Archaeology Review article, Collins writes that the massive disaster was seared into collective cultural memory and preserved in the biblical tradition. The memory of the destruction of Ha-Kekar, with its large population and extensive agricultural lands, was preserved in the book of Genesis and ultimately incorporated into a traditional tale that, drawing on the layer of ash that covered the destruction of one of its major cities, remembered a place consumed by a fiery catastrophe from out of the heavens, he writes. The Bible gives the city's name Sodom. This was from the Times of Israel in 2018, so you could look that up if you wanted to see that. So this is most likely what happened. Fireball comes in, blows the place to pieces, basically. Just, it's wild. So Tel El Hammam, if you want to look it up, you can Google search it. You can find stuff. There's, I think like Nova has some videos on it. There's some like, you can watch the videos of the archaeologists telling you about it and showing you what there is today and how it worked out. But they believe that was Sodom and Gomorrah. So we think we may have found those areas. And that's what had happened, basically. So now let's jump to verse 25. And he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities that which grew upon the ground. Oh, sorry, we just read that one. That's the whole thing. And it's based by that. Verse 26. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. Now, this is a whole nother discussion that's here in verse 26. So Lot's wife turns around. Remember, they fled to the city of Zor. They got to the city before the destruction happened, and they said it was in the morning as the sun rose. Was the sun rising? Maybe it was. Maybe it was this giant fireball coming out of the sky that made it seem like the sun was rising. There could be some possibility of that. But Lot's wife, this is probably one of the more well-known stories out of the Old Testament, she turned around she looked back at the destruction of this whole area of what happened. And it says that she became a pillar of salt. Now, we don't have a ton, there's lots of speculation, ideas about this. Really, if you think about it, I guess the moral of the story for us is understanding when we flee from wickedness, which is what we should be doing, and even the Come Follow Me for this week talks about this, we should flee wickedness, not just casually walk away from wickedness. We should get the heck out of there when it comes to avoiding wickedness and getting ourselves away from it. Okay, that's the prophet has been telling us we need to make the hard choices and change our lives so that we have less wickedness in it. Change the movies we're watching, change the books we read, change the websites we go to, change what we're looking at on social media, change the music we listen to, change our habits and behaviors to be closer to Christ. He's telling us now, start making those hard choices. That means we have some even more difficult choices coming. So very important. But the moral of the story here is that I think most people get from this is when we flee from sin, we cannot look back. Okay, I used to do a lot of work with people who wanted to quit smoking and kind of a counseling type thing. And I told them, do you know what the number one difference is between a smoker and a non-smoker? A non-smoker doesn't smoke, period. To be a non-smoker means to never smoke again. If you smoke even one, you're still a smoker. You need to give it up and never, ever, ever go back. So you have to start with that in mind. It's not just, I'm going to stop smoking or stop eating sugar for a short period of time or whatever it is, whatever the vice is. It doesn't matter. You have to give it up. You have to give it up. You can't just temporarily give it up and then go back to it. That doesn't help. Okay, that's like, I'm going to stop using pornography for 60 days, but then go back to it after 60 days. Well, that doesn't help. You're just going back to it. You need to stop and never look back on it. Never go back. Never go back at all. Going back or looking back is when you have those problems, when the temptations start to arise, when things happen. You know, that's a lot of people when they're getting out, when they're doing drug rehab and getting out of those drugs, they're told in some programs, you need to change the friends you're hanging out with. You need to change the places you go. Any place you went to get a high, you cannot go back to. Anything that would trigger the memory of what it was like to get high will send you back into those temptations and spiral downwards to where you're going to end up back where you used to be. So you have to change things, move to a different location, get out of those old cycles and patterns and habits and start new ones that will reinforce the good behaviors you want to have. That's probably the biggest lesson we can get from what happened with Lot's wife. Granted, like I said, there's a lot of controversy around, did she really turn into a pillar of salt? Was there something else in there? I don't think we have sufficient evidence to know and understand what that could be, but just realize they were told to get out of there and not look back, and she looked back. This is probably a very similar type of story as what we're going to hear later on with the Ark of the Covenant. The children of Israel, when they carried the Ark of the Covenant, were told, do not stabilize it. God will take care of the Ark of the Covenant. And one gentleman decided he needed to stabilize it, and he was vaporized, basically. So a very similar situation. They broke the commandment, and they paid the price. All right, verse 27, and Abraham got up early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord. And he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain, and beheld, and lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. So it was destroyed. I couldn't imagine being Abraham. I'm sure he heard sounds of this destruction, of this impact and things happening, and he looked and just went, oh my gosh, it's gone. Like they said, it was about a 25-kilometer distance that was gone. Just, I'm sure it looked kind of like a massive wildfire, basically just burning out of control. Just, it's gone. It's all gone. That would be so crazy to see. Verse 29, and it came to pass when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot dwelt. So Lot, part of why, from verse 29, part of why Lot was granted this opportunity to get out of there was because of Abraham. Abraham was probably praying for Lot a lot. I know that sounds kind of stupid, but Abraham was probably concerned about Lot, because Lot decided, I'm not going to live out here in the plains. I'm actually go where the money and the commerce is good, and go to Sodom. And I'm going to build my business and become wealthy and do my stuff over there. So he was trying to live a good life, but the allure of wealth and prosperity and opportunity drew him in to the ways of the world, and he moved towards Sodom. And I'm sure Abraham spent a ton of time on his knees praying for his nephew's safety while he was there, praying that he doesn't get sucked in to the wickedness of Sodom and Gomorrah, praying that he can be spared and saved. I'm sure there's lots of prayers day and night that Abraham said, and those culminated in Lot being saved. So is prayer powerful? Is daily, regular prayer powerful? Absolutely. Absolutely. Use it. Pray for those you are concerned about. Use it. There's so much you can do here. So much. Very, very important. All right, verse 30, and when Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountain, so he now leaves Zoar, goes up in the mountain, basically to get out of the area, and his 2 daughters with him, for he feared to dwell in Zoar, and he dwelt in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. So they left. He didn't feel safe in Zoar. If I remember right, and I'd have to go back and look it up, I think Zoar, if I remember right, was one of those cities when Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities of the plains gathered together to fight with these other cities, that big war where Lot was captured. I think Zoar was on that opposing side, and Abraham had to come down to fight them to get Lot out. I think Zoar was one of those cities that was on the opposing side, and so I think Lot was, even though Zoar was closer than getting up to the mountains, and he fled down there, he was afraid that he would probably be captured again and seen as an enemy and stuff, and so he got out of there. That's verse 30, basically. Now, verse 31, and the firstborn said to the younger, our father is old, and there is not a man in the earth to come in unto us after the manner of all the earth. So they're saying, basically, the firstborn, and Joseph Smith put in here, firstborn dealt wickedly and said. So this is a daughter, apparently his firstborn daughter, so the oldest of all of his daughters, said to a younger daughter. So he had his, maybe, I'm not sure what order his daughters were, but we know some were still in Sodom and Gomorrah with their husbands, and some were still with Lot and his wife. And now his wife's gone because she turned into a pillar of salt, which was probably a pretty scary, crazy experience to have too. So they're saying, look, a huge part of our civilization was just wiped out. You know, the enemy cities are down here. We flee from them, so we're kind of in a situation where we are without a nation. We are alone. Our dad is old. There are no men for us to marry so that we can have children and move forward. And so they says, verse 32, come, let us make our father drink wine. We will lie with him that we may preserve seed of our father. So they're concerned that basically their genealogy is about to come to an end because Lot's old when he dies, and then they die. There's no one to continue on this thing. And so they're talking about this. Now, they did come from Sodom and Gomorrah. These women probably understood what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah, how they acted and treated each other and did things. So maybe they still have some old ideas and concepts that they haven't gotten rid of yet. Some challenge, they brought some ideas with them that still came from Sodom and Gomorrah. And so they decided, we are going to basically get our father drunk so he doesn't know what's going on, and then get pregnant by him. So verse 33, and they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he perceived not when she lay down, nor when she arose. And it came to pass on the morrow that the firstborn said unto the younger, behold, I lay yesternight with my father. Let us make him drink wine this night also. Go thou in and lie with him, that we may preserve seed of our father. Verse 35, and they made their father drink that wine that night also. Joseph Smith adds in here, they did wickedly and made this. So there's not a condoning in the scriptures, according to Joseph Smith, of what they did, basically. They shouldn't have done this. And he perceived not when she lay down, nor when she arose. Verse 36, and both were the daughters of Lot with child by their father. And the firstborn bare a son, called his name Moab, the same as the father of the Moabites unto this day. Moab you can find in the Bible dictionary. The younger, she also bare a son, and called his name Ben-Ami, the same as the father of the children of Ammon unto this day. And you can look up Ammon in the Bible dictionary as well. In fact, it's interesting because the word Ammon, we find this in Genesis, word Ammon. It's also found as a name of a great prophet in the Book of Mormon, but it's also the name, it's an Egyptian name, actually. Ammon is the name of an Egyptian god. So that word is a pretty common one from these Old Testament times. So it's not uncommon that even, a couple centuries, several centuries later, when the Book of Mormon starts to take off, they even still have that word Ammon, and they use that. It's actually an opportunity for us because, again, other than the Bible itself and this word Ammon in here, we don't know much about the Ammonites, and we don't know about Egyptian gods and things like that back in Joseph Smith's day. So it's an interesting idea to understand that proper nouns, Joseph Smith gave us lots and lots of proper names in the Book of Mormon that match up with Hebrew and Egyptian names and other names from the biblical times. So he's correct in how they use those names and how they're thought of, which is cool. Another evidence of the validity of the Book of Mormon, basically, that's in there. So, man, there's so much in chapter 19, a lot that happened. I just could not imagine seeing this kind of destruction and problems that they experienced. This would be a wild time to be around and to see this. So you can look up all those references and ideas to do more research into this if you'd like to. Such a crazy time to be around, basically. But we now have a lot of evidence to help us with this. So we're going to see in chapter 20 some more stories and more things going on, basically, that we hear about. We'll hear about the Moabites. So remember, the Moabites and the children of Ammon, these two groups came from this problem with the daughters of Lot getting pregnant by their father without him realizing it, basically. So, and that's going to cause problems later on down the road for the children of Israel and other things. So just realize that that's where they originate. Those tribes, those groups, that's where they originate from, is this kind of incest situation here. So stay tuned for chapter 20.